Welcome. This is the Roundtable on Community Journalism. We have several guests today to talk about community journalism and local community media centers. I want to first introduce everyone who is here today. First of all, we have John Schroeder with Wisconsin Eye. He's right here to my right. John has been working with Wisconsin Eye since 2006. And he is the director of programming, and he basically governs the whole production schedule and programming schedule of Wisconsin Eye. We also have Dee Hall. She is the managing editor of Wisconsin Watch. Dee is formerly a reporter with Wisconsin State Journal, and now she founded Wisconsin Watch. It's a statewide investigatory
nonprofit investigative media center.
Yes, and she provides a lot of news stories for other outlets as well. We also have Jeff Robbins and Dan Presser over here to my left. Jeff is the director of Sun Prairie Media Center. Dan Presser is a former news director and anchor. News anchor. With a local affiliate. He also anchors a show with Sun Prairie called Sun Prairie News.
Correct. Yep.
And so he'll be talking about that experience. Then we have Jeremy Crosby. Jeremy is the director of Fitchburg Fact. He has been with that station since 2010. And they do a show called Talking Fitchburg, which he's going to be talking more about in a bit. And who have I missed? Tom. Tom Laux is with Marshfield Broadcasting with the city of Marshfield. They do a program with the local newspaper called Hub City Times Reports. Presents. Hub City Times Presents. And so he'll be talking about that experience. I'm going to start off this workshop with just an excerpt of a webinar that was held just in March. It was sponsored by Howard University, and it brought together people talking about the use of community communications during a crisis period in health, the pandemic. But the woman who kicked it off had some really interesting comments to make about community media and what does that mean and how do you interact with your communities successfully. So I'm going to be popping that onto the projector here, and you'll have to excuse me, I have to start that up. Thanks.
Dynamic group of women scholars, journalists, executives, and creatives to lead this conversation. First, we will hear from Dr. Lauren Saxton Coleman. She will provide historical context on the role of alternative and community media in community building and community actions, with particular emphasis on the Black press. Dr. Coleman is an assistant professor of communication, culture, and media studies at Howard University. Dr. Coleman explores how Black communities exercise contingent agency via acts of resistance and community formations, transformations via media practice, and her work has been published in a number of peer-reviewed journals. We now welcome Dr. Lauren Saxton Coleman to the stage.
Good afternoon. First, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to participate in this timely and important conversation on the role of community media during public health crises. I enter into this dialogue as a Black cultural studies and media studies scholar. I'm primarily interested in media and conceptualizing media not just as a tool to disseminate information, but media as a organizing community building practice. So today, I want to provide some context on the emergence of definition of community and alternative media organizations, with a particular emphasis on the Black press. First, I want to highlight What are community media? What are alternative media? Oftentimes people ask what makes media community or what makes alternative media alternative. There are varying definitions in the literature, and I want to just highlight some key characteristics of each as you see here, on the screen. In looking at these key characteristics, you notice some similarities between the two. Oftentimes when we talk about community and alternative media, it's in comparison with mainstream media. I want us to try to resist the urge in doing that, particularly as it pertains to size and scope. Because when we constantly compare community and alternative media to mainstream media, we run the risk of delegitimizing, deprioritizing, and even minimizing the credibility of the vital role that these kinds of media organizations play in our community. So, thinking about the last slide that kind of highlighted some of the key characteristics, we ask ourselves, what are the similar characteristics between the two? While not synonymous, certainly there are some similarities. First, in both community and alternative media organizations, community members are humanized. We are written about as people, not objects. We are people with agency in our own lives. And more importantly, we become the experts in the experiences and the issues that we deal with in our communities. Two, across both community and alternative media organizations, stories that are told about our communities counter often negative, crippling or limiting or one-sided stories about us in mainstream media. Also, importantly, the audiences, the readers, the listeners of community and alternative media organizations are transformed from passive media consumers to actually a part of the media production process. People in the community often work for or community and alternative media organizations and are seen as credible sources for information. And so one of the key characteristics that I showed earlier, that across both community and alternative media, community members are seen as experts and as officials, and so they're often included in these stories alongside what we would consider, or what mainstream considers, elite or official experts. For Black communities in particular, our engagement with alternative media is not new. The Black press would first emerge in 1827 with freedom.
Okay, so I think that's a really good introduction. I think many of us are looking to find ways to integrate what we do with our communities, and some of us are just trying to get the word out on the local level about what's going on. I'm going to turn now to John Schrader, and he's going to be talking about what Wisconsin Eye does to bring information to local communities.
Thanks, Mary. And thank you, members of Wisconsin Community Media, for the invitation to be here today at today's panel. Looking forward to the conversation. A quick shout out of gratitude to Mary and her team, in particularly to Jake, who I don't think he's here today yet, but in developing and some collaborations that Wisconsin Eye has been working on with your members and what we produce at Wisconsin Eye. Forgive me as I look at a few notes here. For those who are maybe less familiar with Wisconsin Eye, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. We're based here in Madison. We're just around the corner on West Washington. We have a 9-member board of directors. Our president and CEO is John Hankus, and of course, I'm John Schrader. I'm director of program production. The focus of Wisconsin Eye's programming, or kind of our mission, is, to summarize this, like public policy and politics, really from that state level point of view. In particular, that gavel-to-gavel coverage, which a lot of us are familiar with, but we also do programming in kind of that programming style of a half-an-hour show. The two big ones that we have at Wisconsin Eye are Newsmakers and Rewind. Newsmakers is every Monday, and Rewind, which is kind of an encapsulation of the news from a state public policy point of view, is on Fridays, kind of reviewing what took place during the week. I talked a little bit about that collaboration at the top of my comments, but I just wanted to reiterate that some time ago, Jake and I started developing this idea of sharing that programming, and over time, it's developed. So I think last year we started, and we've made available Newsmakers and Rewind to members, anybody who may want to use that in their programming. And I'm super grateful for that collab. It's been really beneficial on lots of different levels. Community journalism. So that's kind of the broad theme that we're all together here about. And I put together some thoughts about it, and particularly as it pertains to Newsmakers and Rewind, because that's kind of a good segue in my mind of kind of what that means in a way to Wisconsin Eye, and a little bit more, and more so our viewers. Well, I was going to talk about, well, Newsmakers. Well, I think I can skip that part. What I like about the idea of community journalism, or that topic rather, is that even though rightly so, we focus a great deal on like the logistics, the technology, the distribution, all of that goes into sort of getting the physical content out to our viewers. What really gets me up in the morning are the conversations about, well, what are we going to put out there? What are we going to put on the air? And some of that for us is pretty easy. It's sort of that event-based coverage that we do out of the state capitol and within the community that we sort of greaterly see as Wisconsin. In fact, today we're just around the corner in Dane County Court, live streaming at 10, Call versus Ermansky, which is a big case on the topic of abortion. But when it comes to like Newsmakers, so much work goes into sort of figuring out, well, what do we talk about? Who do we invite? And I just love that part of what I do on a weekly, daily basis. And I'm looking forward to hearing what other people have to say on that, because one thing I've learned is that there are days where I feel like we've met the mark on what community journalism might mean from my standpoint, or kind of how we define it at Wisconsin Eye. But there are other days where I feel like I personally missed the mark, or we've missed the mark, and I've learned to connect with others who have more expertise in this. And I look across the panel here because I've learned so much about how to do it and how other people are doing it, which has kind of really informed how we do it at Wisconsin Eye, or attempt to on a daily basis. So that kind of concludes my opening remarks, and I think Dee, you're up next.
Yeah, pardon me for my raspy voice. It's been a good week, and I still can't shake this cold, but I'm told that I'm not infectious. So I'll take it from the expert over here that I am not Dr. Bill. Okay, so Wisconsin Watch is a nonprofit investigative news outlet. We're based at the UW-Madison, but we are a separate 501c3 nonprofit. We raise our own money, we pay ourselves, and we provide all of our stories for free to any media outlet in the state of Wisconsin. So I'd encourage any community media outlets who are interested to get onto our distribution list, because once you have our stories, they're like Associated Press stories. You can use them however you will, just so long as you give us credit, which we appreciate. And so what I did here, and this doesn't translate as well on a piece of paper, but there is a spreadsheet that I sent to Mary that has a list of all the partners we work with and other nonprofit newsrooms work with to provide a steady stream of news of interest to Wisconsin. So of course, first on the list should be Wisconsin Watch. It's not, but it should be. Like I said, we provide stories for free. These are investigations that take anywhere from a week to 3 years. We're not going to do that one again probably, but a week to months to do, and we give them away for free because we understand the economics of the news business. So we are supported by foundations and individuals who value in-depth news of interest to the state of Wisconsin. But there are many, many other news outlets, not necessarily based in Wisconsin, that are actually providing some really, really good content, which you could adapt for your own purposes. I will acknowledge we are not putting out television scripts. We're not releasing B-roll. And so that's an area we'd love to get into, actually, is to get into video. Right now, we're primarily an online print-oriented news organization, and we do audio reports as well, some audio reports. So, for example, ProPublica gives its stories away for free. They recently did a huge story about a death on a dairy farm here in Dane County, and what the factors were that led to both the death and then the essentially the wrong narrative that got told about the death because of language barriers. Kaiser Health News, we use them a lot. One of our best read stories of the last couple months was a story about how Wisconsin is one of the leaders in something called estate recovery, which is they take money back from people whose family, or patients who've received Medicaid once they pass away. The state often goes after the estate to get some of that money back, which is somewhat controversial, and we're one of the leaders in that. There's the state's newsroom, which is, for us, Wisconsin Examiner, issues of importance to Wisconsin. They give their stuff away for free, too. Something called The Conversation, which is more academic. Daily Yonder, which is more rural issues. There's State Line, which really compares state by state, which is always interesting to me. Where does Wisconsin rank in the scheme of things in the state? The Badger Project is similar to us, a smaller organization, but they also do in-depth investigative stories, primarily about issues of campaign finance and police tactics, or about the police. Center for Public Integrity, they do a lot of data-driven stories, and they give you the data for free. They'll say, hey, here it is, do your own story, or run their story. Center for Public Integrity, quite similar. Even MinnPost, any of the outlets that are on the western side of Wisconsin might be interested in some of MinnPost stories. There's Grist. We've used several of theirs. They do a lot of stories about large agriculture, like community. Concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs. Chalkbeat, they write about, primarily about education issues, and VoteBeat, similar. They write about voting rights, election administration. We just did a story from National Parks Traveler. That's the first one we did, because it turns out that Wisconsin has a surprising number of places that are federally controlled where they charge fees, and the story focused on some what were considered to be excessive fees for entrance. Indian Country Today, as you know, we have several Native American tribes in Wisconsin. We did a story about casino gaming and the fact that it's a somewhat unstable source of revenue for tribes. You've got the Milwaukee Neighborhood News Service. I don't know if they give I think they give their stories away for free. If you're a Milwaukee-based outlet, you might want to approach them and make sure that you can use their stuff. And then there's something called Shelter Force, which deals with housing and community development. So those are some of the resources here. Again, they're on a piece of paper, but there is a spreadsheet that Mary's got that's available. You can check out their stories. You can create a feed for yourself, so you can see what they're coming out with. For example, on my drive up here, I heard a Kaiser Health News story, and I thought, wow, I wonder if there's anything about Wisconsin in there, and sure enough, there is. So my next step is going to be check my email. I'm going to have that Kaiser Health News story in there. I'm going to localize it, which usually takes 1 or 2 phone calls, maybe even just a web search, and all of a sudden we have a Wisconsin story. So it's really easy to take these in-depth stories and make them relevant to your audience.
Thank you, Dee. Those are excellent resources, and I think that's very exciting that we're not alone. There's help out there. Okay, our next speaker is Jeff Robbins and Dan Presser. They will have a presentation. Derek, who is handling our projector, will turn that back on, and here you go.
Kick us off. Mary, I wasn't prepared to talk until 9:50. So I'm Jeff Robbins, the director of the Sun Prairie Media Center. I'm honored to be joined here today with Dan Presser. So basically, the show that we do called Sun Prairie News has its outgrowth or has its humble beginnings really going back to when I first took over the media center in 2014. Back in 2014, I would say we were a very reactive media center, which meant that if somebody came into our media center and said, I want to see coverage of this, or I want you to do something on that, then we would do that, or we would provide the tools for that community member to cover that story or that event. When I started, I wanted to be a little bit more proactive and have more say over the kind of programming that we were doing. That doesn't mean that I wanted to have editorial control over the things, but I wanted to make sure that we were producing content that was of relevance to the community and of interest to the community, and not just maybe of interest to one group or another group, looking at more at the community as a whole. So I always thought that one of the most important things we could do is to provide news and information, believe it or not, about our community to our community. And so we started running a show in 27. Were you the first host of Council Playback?
I was, yeah. Council Playback was basically we'd talk to city council members about what was going on that week, and each week we'd have a different council member, and that was a radio program. So we'd get kind of long form. If there was some type of a development going on in one of the council person's district, we would talk with them long form. And that show then does continue to live today, but I am no longer the host. I did it for about a year, and then Steve Sabatke, who is great at it, much better than I ever was, he does it now, and it's a very worthwhile program. I can take that from you.
Okay.
Very worthwhile program. My experience, I grew up in broadcast TV, broadcast news, and first of all, I want to say I really appreciate what Wisconsin Watch does and what Wisconsin Eye does, because what you do is so much more in depth than what we can do in the broadcast media, and we do a very classic newscast. It's very much a hyper-local newscast. Sun Prairie News. That's why it's called Sun Prairie News, and it's done very much like a newscast would have been done and is still done on local TV.
That's by design, what you said.
And that is by design, because that's what I know. That's what I grew up in. I'm sure there's probably better ways to do it now, and some people have evolved to do it better, but this is how I know it, and it's the way I know how to do it. So do you want to keep going, or should I keep babbling on here?
I'll say
you
one
go
thing.
for it.
So I do want to give WCM some credit, because back in, I think, 2016, there was a conference. I don't remember where that conference was, but there was the keynote speaker, I think, or one of the closing luncheons or opening luncheons or middle of the day breakfasts or whatever they were, with John Nichols and Bob McChesney. And they talked about the importance of community media and community journalism, and how a lot of that is and should be falling on community media centers as newspapers slowly fade away, and traditional network affiliates, the newsrooms kind of get a little bit leaner, and maybe not meaner, but certainly leaner. So anyway, so Dan did this wonderful show called Council Playback for a year, and then he said, I've got better things to do with my time, or I'm busy. And we get that a lot from volunteers. We don't pay people. Dan doesn't get paid for what he does, although he should. But Dan had a real job to tend to. But I think Dan was very gracious and said, anything I can help with, let me know. And then we started collaborating on a documentary on the gas explosion we had in Sun Prairie in 2018, which is coming out later this year for the 5th anniversary of that event. And then something called COVID happened, right, Dan? And you all of a sudden had a little more time on your hands, perhaps. And I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything here. And you said, well, tell me what you said.
Okay. Tell us what you said. So over the years, Jeff and I had talked about a newscast, and at the time, I basically I was sitting in my house, like a lot of us, looking for stuff to do, and I said, well, I'm going to put together a little newscast, and I did a radio newscast.
Can you hit that? I think we have a sample.
I don't even remember.
Who chose the music?
You did.
I did.
You did.
Oh, okay.
Hello, this is Dan Presser with the 103.5 The Sun Update. Wisconsin lawmakers plan to vote on a new coronavirus response bill starting Tuesday. The bill, backed by Republican leaders, was released to the public Monday. It allows the Budget Committee to allocate up to
So that obviously we were not hyper local, and that was just a sample that never hit the air. He basically then said, you know, this is cool and everything, but I want to talk to you about doing something for television. So that's what we did. I basically set up honestly my phone most of the time.
Our studios were closed.
Yeah, the studios were closed. I'd got a camera at first and went in and did the whole thing in my living room or my dining room basically, and just did a little newscast. Was 6 minutes to 8 minutes or something, very streamlined, and it was again very hyper local.
I think we have a sample.
Oh, yeah, that's my dining room.
Hello, I'm Dan Presser, and this is Sun Prairie in Focus, a regular review of what's making news and events going on around our community. If you have ideas for stories or information you'd like to see included in Sun Prairie in Focus, send us an email at spmcinfocus@gmail.com. Now let's get right to the news. 3 major proposals for Sun Prairie are moving forward in the development process. The City Plan Commission met virtually to discuss the proposals at their most recent meeting.
God. So there, we did city news. We did council, we did planning commission, we did council of the whole, we did other, police and fire commissions, and we still do that. That's really kind of the meat and potatoes of what I cover. And as you can see, I basically would take the feeds from Jeff and the gang over at Sun Prairie Media Center and use it as my video, and often I'd grab a soundbite off of that. Most often I would, because it's nice to have sound. And you can see everybody else was in COVID too. So that's what we did. And then we kind of evolved into a much longer show because we were working on an idea that that one of the local TV stations was kind of pitching us, and so we expanded to a 30-minute show, 22 minutes of news with breaks for commercials.
Can you go to the next slide, Jeremy?
And so we were still calling it Sun Prairie in Focus, but at that time then they wanted it to be something very much just Sun Prairie News. So we changed the name of the show from Sun Prairie in Focus to Sun Prairie News. We were still Sun Prairie in Focus at this point. And so I would do, like you see our library director, I'd go out with my phone and a tripod and a lav mic that I'd purchased. I basically spent about $750 on equipment just because I wanted to do it. So I'd go out and do stories and things like that. And it was great. It got me through the pandemic because it was something I loved doing, and it was, I wasn't really getting paid a lot to do my real job because I'm a realtor like Bill, and so we weren't selling a ton of houses early in the pandemic. So that's kind of how that evolved.
I think over time, I think over time, you went out and got more and more sound bites, and I think we started helping you with more and more graphics, and it was still a 10-minute version, but it started to look a little more professional, and then eventually, as we have here on the slide, you started coming into the studio, and we started doing it in the studio, and then I think it, not that there was anything wrong with how you were doing it in your home, but I think it looked a little, it just looked a little more professional. Yeah.
And it was great. I mean, the crew over at Sun Prairie Media Center, Mara Trusty is my director, and she basically directs the show just like I directed newscasts back in the day when I was in TV news at Channel 27. And so it was very familiar. We do it by the seat of our pants sometimes because I throw it together pretty quickly. But I always want to do it on Monday mornings. And unfortunately, we don't get as in-depth with a lot of things, but we do try to get sound, and I always do. I confirm sources, I call, I work it like a beat. I will email or call the police, I'll call or email the school board. I will, talk to city council members. And that, as you know, takes a lot of time. So kind of the work up to the show takes more time than really the show and getting it ready. And I edit it too. So, but we do get help. I get a lot of help from the folks over at Sun Prairie Media Center. They don't, like Jeff said, they don't editorialize in what I do, but they do ask me sometimes, hey, there's this event going on, do you want us to get some video of it? And I'll say, sure, if I want it. And honestly, any video I can get sometimes is great to have. So that's kind of where that's where it kind of evolved to, and now we are Sun Prairie News, and we do a half-hour show, which includes, the first block is really news. It's kind of traditional broadcast news. The second block, we now added sports with the local newspaper. They have their sports editor who does the sports. He's a newspaper guy, so it goes pretty long sometimes. Not my typical sportscast. But we had a guy early on who was great. He had done sports, and so that was great. And then we do interviews. We kind of have a rotating cast of city officials who come in and do interviews. And that's live, and we do it like a satellite interview where we sit side by side, and we're literally in the same room, but we do it like a satellite interview. Just to make it look different, because we have a lot of, like right there, you can see our city manager, our city administrator, Aaron Oppenheimer. He'll come in and he'll talk about stuff going on. And that's how we do the newscast. And I can talk more about the nuts and bolts later, but I don't want to take this whole period.
Do you want to show them should we see the sample?
Sure, you can
Let's see the
show
clip.
quick, I guess.
Oh. This is like a condensed version of.
Hello, I'm Dan Presser. Thanks for joining us for Sun Prairie News. This episode, we begin with the spring election. Voters in Sun Prairie make their choices for uncontested city council seats, mayor, judges, and board members for the Sun Prairie Area School District. Spring sports are here, so no time to rest on your laurels. What do we got? Welcome back to Sun Prairie News. Well, maybe you're looking for a little support as you pull your taxes together this time of year. Well, you're in luck, because Rod Ellenbecker from the Bank of Sun Prairie is here with some tips for us, and thanks for being here, Rod. Filling the need for food here in Sun Prairie, the Sun Prairie Emergency Food Pantry is always there. And when it comes to helping stock those shelves, local scouts answer the call. Our Out and About reporter Sandy Kittner caught up with them on their recent drive.
I'm out here at Carriage Hills State Park, because recently it was the kickoff site for the annual Scouting for Food. What's Scouting for Food? Well, it's a national program of Scouting BSA that collects food for local food banks, in this case the Sun Prairie Area Food Pantry.
Time now for our quick hit movie review with Jameson Rabbit. This episode, it's John Wick 4.
It's Jameson Rabbit back with another quick hit movie review this week. I'm coming at you with a great action movie from a great franchise we've had. It's the fourth installment of the John Wick series.
That's it for Sun Prairie News. This time, we'll leave you with the music of the Sun Prairie Ukulele Community Group. They recently entertained the Sun Prairie Rotary at their holiday party in Flavors Camp.
So you can see we kind of do, in the later part of the program, we're not as hyper-local because it just fills time, unfortunately. We need that time. But we have local guys doing it, and I'm remiss in saying our Out and About reporter, Sandy Kintner, loves to do it. He came to me and asked to do it, and he's a great feature reporter. He really does a really nice job. He's a retired man, and he just goes out, and he's a great writer. He does a really nice job. So it's great to have him, and it fills up a couple of minutes every show, so I love it. And he's way ahead. He's got like 3 stories in the can usually, so it's great. So.
I think, what's interesting looking at that is that it seems like we get a lot of help from the community with Sandy and Jameson doing the movie reviews, but I think Dan would back me up on this by saying we wish we had more help from the community. We'd like to get more student involvement, more people out shooting things, and take some of the burden off of Mr. Presser. But at the end of the day, you're doing the lion's share of it, which.
Right, and it takes a lot of time, as you guys know.
So real quick, Jeremy, let's just take a look at the slide, and then we can stop talking. Why do we do this? Well, I think it gives credibility to the media center with our public. I think doing a local news that has somebody with credibility like Mr. Presser here, I think improves our public image, and also with the city. I think the city. The city funds us. We want to prove to the city that we're doing interesting, credible, relevant content. And I think a show like this really helps us with our image with the city. It's shared a lot, by council members online, on social media. And so I know that people are watching this, and I think people have really looked to Dan for a good way to get their story out in a easily digestible way that's not sitting through a 3-hour council meeting. I think it fulfills a media gap in the city. The local newspaper recently went from one paper to two. Went from 2 papers to 1 a week, and of course, TV stations locally are just not as hyper-local as we can be. It fulfills our mission of the Sun Prairie Media Center to provide relevant, informative content and to inform our community, and something that I use the word potential, Dan. There's the potential for advertising revenue. We haven't really seen that come through yet, but I think that this is something that as we move forward and we try to diversify our revenue streams a little bit more, I think this is really a good way that we can do this, because even back when I used to work at Channel 3 and when you probably worked at 27, news was probably the biggest seller. It was easier to sell news than it was to sell Judge Mathis, probably, yeah. All right, that's all I got for now.
We went over our 8 minutes. So.
Yes, you did. That's all right. That's all right. We'll just take it out of discussion, but it'll be all right.
And I wanted to give props to Dan. Dan has won 2 straight awards for Best Newscast from the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association, which is actually the radio, but we take the audio of the TV show and put it on our radio station. So it helps with our content on the radio side as well. Okay, sorry. Now I'm done.
Okay, that's all right. That's worth noting. Congratulations. So our next speaker is going to be Jeremy Crosby. He's over here manning the laptops, getting his presentation ready. Jeremy does a show called Talking Fitchburg.
Robin, do you want to be my guy?
Sure, I'd love to be.
And all right, here you go.
All right, good morning. And I do want to point out Nick is over there. Nick is actually the prime editor. He's the guy for Talking Fitchburg. Regardless that I do the on-air stuff, Nick is behind the scenes. It's become kind of his job. So the difference between what they're doing at Sun Prairie and what we're doing is ours is all done by staff. So we're not volunteer. We changed our whole model to be news and surrounded everything with our station around that concept. So I grew up watching Dan, and I wanted to mimic what Dan was doing. I know I did say that the other day. But I think our ultimate goal was I also, too, heard from the same conference that from WCM, from ACM, I had heard it over and over again, that local news and that gap was so important. And we made a group decision to go into news, but we also made a decision that we didn't want to do it like the typical newscast. We wanted to take elements of it, but we didn't think people would take us serious if we just did and sit on behind a desk and do those typical newsy things. So we made our start look more like a podcast and be more like talking about the news, but not like over delivering. And plus we're city government, so we're not going to be able to dive in and do a lot of independent reporting because we could cross some channels that would be not so well. So with that in mind, next slide. The areas I want to talk about, obviously we'll talk about Talking Fitchburg. I want to share how we do it because I think that's really important to see the behind the scenes of it, and then just the benefits of local newscast. Next slide. As far as Fact TV and what we're doing, and I'm sorry, my laptop color is not coming out very well, so bear with us. It's not that hideous. But, just so you know who we are, what we're doing, we're everywhere. That's the goal, right, is to be everywhere we can be. That's part of our goal. We have 2 channels now. We went down from 3 to 2 with the emphasis of focusing on these 3 areas. Next slide. Which is government meeting coverage, community news, and city communications and staff projects. It took from 2010 to a couple of years ago to get us into these 3 bins, so to speak. So we focus on these 3 areas, and that's what makes a difference. Robin's killing me. Again, when we say we went in on all news, we took a lot of things away. I mean, we didn't go out and produce shows anymore. We don't make TV shows anymore because people weren't watching them. We covered everything and turned it into a show. It didn't matter. People weren't watching. And again, hearing the local news end of thing, I had experience in news. It felt like it was the right move for us. We too were more reactive station when we started. We would shoot something and sit on it for weeks before we would put it out. Now we're shooting something and turning it out within 24 hours, and that's really important because we want people who are looking at our channel to see something new all the time, and now they're getting that all the time. That never stops, which probably drives Nick crazy because he never stops working, and happy he's sitting here today. So Talking Fitchburg, next slide. It started in 2015, and you can kind of see in that top left corner there, pressed in the what I'd say the podcast mode. That was kind of the second version. You'll see a slide coming up here that we started it in my office. If you had ever watched any sports shows, Dan Patrick Show is what was our image that we were going for. So a couple of guys sitting around talking about random sports. We wanted to take that concept and do it with news. So we'll go out and cover events. We share city information, and anything that's happening in Fitchburg, we're covering it or being called to cover it. That we've turned that corner where people call us to come out and cover events and what's going on. Next slide. So in the Talking Fitchburg, I said it started in 2015. We started in my office. It was we had a studio space that was still being developed, so we needed something to start with. So the desk worked in my office. It was what it was, right? It did the job. That transitioned into a big studio set in our studio, but our studio was a multi-purpose room, so we were not able to stay in that room constantly. So every day we would spend an hour setting it up and taking it down. And when you're trying to do a newscast, which started out to be an hour, so when we did it, we started off with an hour. We had multiple segments, great guests, all that. It was a lot of work, and eventually we ended up moving out of that space and back into our main office, turned our classroom into a studio, and we've got Talking Fitchburg there. So the daily newscast happens Monday through Friday, new shows at 11 and 6 every day, with the 6 o'clock show being kind of the show that includes our great guest segment, and I'll explain how we kind of transitioned. But we also, again, I showed you that slide, we do share this on multiple platforms as well. Next slide, please. As far as what it is, we have headlines, guest segments, event coverage, health segment. Again, anything that is newsworthy that we can get our hands on, we're doing it and putting it out there. I'll show you a little bit later that not only does what we do, we have turned it into multiple entities. So we take one newscast and we turn it into a whole bunch of different little things to fill content gaps that was instrumental when the group came up with it, and we'll show you that here in a minute. Next slide. So how do we produce a newscast? I think most importantly, if you're wrapping your head around why you want to do it and how you want to do it, this is what Nick does every day, and what we do. We start off in the mornings looking for those news stories, put it into a rundown, create the graphics and editing. Nick kind of starts at that position, although we both can look for stories. Tape the newscast, edit. I mean, that is rinse and repeat twice a day. So that's kind of the process of how you get it out and get it out quickly. So we don't sit on it. We're always constantly moving and constantly moving ahead, if you will. And you can with the next slide. So we use a Rundown to put the newscast together. Rundown Creator is the software that we purchased. It was something close to iNews is what I had used in the news setting. So we wanted to find something. There was another person, Andrew Bamlett, who was on our staff and went to Public Works. Anyway, we both had used this, used a Rundown before, so we needed something that we could use to lay out our shows, have who's going to edit it, what's going to entail in it, and this one also provided teleprompter services built into it, so it's like an all-in-one news gatherings area, or for us to put our news and stuff in it. So it drives what we do each and every day, and these are laid out for usually within the week. We lay them out for each daily show, and I fill it in with the news stories, and then Nick takes over from there, and we don't have to talk too much. I mean, Nick is pretty much going in and looking at that information and is coming up with what's the graphic going to look like, and that's at his discretion. I don't have to go in too many times and say, hey, we're going to do this. We'll try to narrow it down to the best we can. We write it out when we're reading the news. We try to just highlight some top points, nothing more than 30 seconds, and move on to the next story. A closer look, next slide, please. Just a closer look here, number 10. Sorry. Oh boy. There you go. So a closer look there at the rundown, you can see that it's laid out with the show open. I do a quick intro of whatever, the day or date, and then we go from there. So we'll put in the slug of the story. If you click into that, but you click in there, you can lay your scripts in there, and then we have that graphic from Link. So I'll share that information. Nick will go to that link that's off to the right there to find the graphic that I'm referring to, or take the content that's in the story to make the graphic, or we'll put in find video, get video from here. That's there. One important piece, and Dan had kind of mentioned, and Jeff too, we share, when we post up all of our newscasts, we share the links where we get the stories from. So to avoid any question about, who is our contacts, where are we getting this stuff from, we put that included in our story. So when you see a story or our show go out, you'll see, here's our headlines for the day, here's the stories, there's the links. We want to make sure we're setting them up to learn a little bit more about it, but we're hoping they'll take that next step and find and use the resource. If it's a press release, a little bit different. Things do come in as press releases until it gets created and put somewhere. Sometimes we have to make that, but I think that's an important piece when you're doing news is you want to be transparent, and especially for us being a government agency, we want to be 100% transparent with no questions about where we got our content, copyright issues or more. So I do point that out. Next slide. Who do we work with and how do we find the stories? I think that's another big question. We are within the city hall, so we have access to all the city departments. We had to build those relationships, though, so that's an ongoing process that is not easy, but I meet with different city departments all the time, and we have it set up that they need to contact us anytime there's some type of news happening, road closure, a new event coming to the city, whatever the case may be, it's got to cross my desk. And if it doesn't, then we go after them in a nice way. We also follow a ton of local businesses, nonprofits, government agencies. I put up the feed there over to the right. So we use our Facebook page to get information out, but I use it to gather information. So I'm following every single business in Fitchburg. Anything that's moving, breathing, I'm finding it, going in there, trying to find the stories of what they're sharing with the community. So it's a great resource to find stuff that are happening because you're getting what they're sharing, right? You're getting their top stories from what's happening in the city. So it can be a great resource there. Definitely signed up with a lot of different press releases from different entities, from like Dane County government, public health. The resource page that Dee shared today is going to be awesome to go in and grab some stuff from there. But anywhere you can get information about what's happening in your community, that's where you got to go to find it and share it. That's how we find it every day. And we have a list that we work off of that Nick and I can use to help find different information. Next slide. And then as far as other just stories, we also bank stories. So we have a separate rundown that just has a whole bunch of stories laid out. So because it's a daily newscast and a daily grind, when it's a slow news day, it happens, you need something to fill that with. So we bank up a lot of stories ahead of time. So any community events coming up, you can see those dates that are on there. We know when it's coming. So if I cannot find new news for the day, I'll jump in here, grab the story, lay it in, and we go. So a lot of, when we're searching for news, it's not just for that day. It could be something that we'll bank and use for a couple of newscasts down the road, if you will. So kind of another piece. If you're doing this, when you're spending time looking for news, you got to spend time of make sure that if you find something that you could reuse, that you go bank it and be ready to pull it back out. And Dan could really probably describe that better than I can, but it's hard to find news, and it can be tough at times. So that's kind of our backup plan, if you will, when we're looking for news stories. Next slide. And then we also plan out for the month. We have a document that we have so we know what guests that we have booked out for the month. So this first week was a very busy week for us. We had double guests every day. We try to fill one guest segment a day, but sometimes there's just a lot of events happening. Monday we had a busy weekend with different types of tree plants, so we had to get that into the show. But we have these regular guest segments booked monthly. So at the end of the month, Nick will reach out to all of our standing guests, say, hey, it's the next month. When can you meet? And then we record those. We'll record those via Zoom. We do have a studio that we just rebuilt, which we're excited. Nick and I just finished that construction last week. So we'll be excited to get back in the studio with those guests. But if we don't have a guest that's coming in, then we're going out and filming stories, and that becomes the guest segment for the day. And if we don't have any guests for the day, then we'll repeat a guest segment if we have to. It doesn't happen very often. I'd say every couple of months we run into that, but we're pretty good at banking up those guests and repeating them. So the next slide is a little crazy, but I was kind of thinking, like, you guys are probably wondering, like, how do you do it, though? How do you really do this? And I kind of mentioned here earlier that one thing can turn into lots of things, and that's what really drew us to doing a newscast. So, for instance, an event comes in, we'll get it into our daily newscast right away. Like, let's just say it's a ribbon cutting. We have a ribbon cutting actually for B-Cycle coming up next week, right? So we'll put it in the show that, hey, there's going to be a ribbon cutting next week. Come out and have some fun. We'll also take that same graphic that Nick makes, put it up on our community bulletin board. So that automatically is now filled another piece of content for us on our channel. We'll continue to air that daily. It will replay on the show daily. We'll preview the event. So now we got another segment out of this because we can interview somebody from B-Cycle and say, hey, tell us a little bit about what's B-Cycle and what do we have coming up? You know what I mean? Then we can also get out there or replay that interview up until the time that it comes. We'll upload those to social media. So you can kind of see the trend here. It pushes itself to more and more places of getting information out. And then we go to covering the event, creating a package, uploading it, airing it on Talking Fitchburg. So one little scheduled event turns out to be fills in a lot of time for us, a lot of coverage area that I think is what makes it attractive to do these things. You can use it more than just in one newscast. You can turn it around and use it on many different formats and platforms. Next slide. That's okay. Just cutting into my time. Talking Fitchburg itself, it breaks down to an AM show, a PM show, and then we have our guests and packages. So we used to do a 22-minute show. Well, we did an hour show, then we went to a 22-minute show. Then we decided that we could actually, I'm going to say this nicely, but we are putting a newscast together that's sort of, we put our headlines in, and then we just immediately in our channel schedule our guest segment for the day. So I used to intro, outro all the packages, and we would go through that motion. Well, we decided that it would be easier for us to just do the headlines, put that in, and then in our scheduler, we schedule those packages right after it at 6 o'clock. So a 30-minute newscast now doesn't have all Jeremy. It has headlines of Jeremy, and then it goes on to show the guest packages for the day, and we move on. So it's another way that we've kind of cut down the time on what we're doing, because we were spending more time editing intro outros than actually, getting the content out. So it's kind of a big transition for us that we just made. But again, just showing again that you have one thing that really can turn into multiple things for sharing content out. So hopefully that makes sense. Next slide. Again, I mentioned we do have scheduled guest segments for the month, so we try to, again, book seasonal things. So that's Tim Halbach from the National Weather Service. So you had the Severe Weather Awareness Week. So each year I have a standing date that I know I'm going to contact him. We're going to do a segment because it's that time of year. But we have pre-scheduled guests to upcoming guests. The sky's the limit for what you can bring in, but if you can get people who can keep coming back as a reoccurring event, or recurring guest, that's works really well for you. I mentioned off the top that it's really important for us to get any of the community shows or events that we cover. We want to turn that out in 24 hours. So our staff will go and shoot it. It might be somebody shoots it and then we get it to another staff person to edit, or else poor Nick has to do all of that plus edit a package for the day. It can be a lot of work there. And I did mention that we do Zoom or in-person guest segments. So we're going to get back to the studio here real soon. But Zoom opened up the possibility to talk to people further away now, and we can get them in easier because they can be at home and we can interview them and go from there. Just the last couple of slides here just is on the benefits of a local newscast, and I would just conclude with what has already been said here today, but hyper-local coverage is needed out there. That's where it's at. There's so many things that are happening in your city that is just can create content for you and drive what you're doing. It has a short shelf life. That's the way we look at it. So we continue to want to get it out quickly. We found that the old model of just taping something and putting it out there and replaying it isn't necessarily the best model versus getting something out there as quickly as we can while it's relevant. That's important to us. So we move on things really quickly. And then I've already shared that one piece of content can turn into many. Talking Fitchburg became an entity that was a newscast, but then we could take all of these packages, replay them under different show names. So we have the Rewind show that has all of our guests replaying. So it keeps our content looking fresh when you do tune into Fact TV. The power of multimedia. We all have so many great ways of reaching out to people and collecting content. I think don't overlook that. Facebook for us is great to share content, but it's also a great place to find people and what's going on and connect with people because they'll start reaching out to you for event coverage. And then those partnerships are huge. Working with our departments, this opened us up to working with our city staff. Elected officials are watching us because we're at every event. We see them. So they're calling us if we're not at something now. And that's a great feeling to have and know that if they don't see Fact TV, there's something wrong, right? That's awesome for us. And then just work with the community and businesses. That's where it's at for us. And we are now taking more of a direction to citywide communication. So I think we're heading towards where Tom is at with what he's been doing up in Marshfield. So a lot of stuff there. I know I went over my time, but hopefully you got an eye into what we're doing. Nick, anything to add?
No, I think you covered it.
All right, good, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much. That's fascinating. The organizational structure you have in place to deal with all of this is amazing. Okay, so our next speaker is Tom Laux. He's with Marshfield Broadcasting. He's going to be talking about a collaboration with his local newspaper. Do you have a PowerPoint? You don't? Yay. Okay. Then I don't have to worry about the tech. All right, great.
Okay. Thank you. Just for those that don't know me, my passion is journalism, photojournalist since the late 80s. And went to school for photojournalism and worked for newspapers for probably 15 to 20, maybe more, I don't even know. So that was my first career in that area, and then did portrait studio and now community TV in 2011. But I always saw the value in working with local news organizations, especially newspapers, because that's my passion and where I was at. So I did that way back in 2011 when I started this while working for Wisconsin Rapids. And really wanted to make sure that we were using the local newspapers. I had a great connection there because I was an editor there, so that worked well. And why not use that the best I can? I remember even going there as a photojournalist covering things for the newspaper, and I said, well, let's try to make some connections here, and that worked out well. So doing so, here I'll just fast forward to where we're at today in Marshfield, which I moved to about 4 years ago. And we connect with a local newspaper that was not part of where I was from, but as you know, Gannett has changed, and not that we won't work with them, we definitely will, but we work with Hub City Times. And I saw the value of really working along with them and getting them in front of the camera. And we started the program with a volunteer, actually, instead of having staff do the work. But right now our volunteer had got a job, so we moved it over into some help with staff production, not as the host itself. But we use a called Hub City Presents, and we partner with Hub City Times. It's a local weekly in town, and actually they're getting very large multimedia channels in the state of Wisconsin. So if any of you guys know that, I actually, the editor or the owner is here in Marshfield. So we could definitely get you connected with them if needed. So it's been a very good asset. So what I look at is we plan, my goal is, and sometimes it doesn't happen, sometimes it does, is that we plan programs so that they can do what I call a centerpiece package, just kind of like, we'll talk a little bit newspaper style, centerpiece, rail, all this kind of stuff. they're able to put links and drive it to the content that we're doing, and vice versa. So we're trying to bounce each other, do one nice solid package on a story. And we do about a 15 to 20 minute program in the studio, and they get their guests. But there's a story along with that that goes into the newspaper. So we want to package it all together, and that works out really well. So we've been doing that for probably 3 years. And not only do we do Hub City Presents, but we work with the local radio station a lot. That is something that started originally by just going there and filming programs. Now, I did that way back in Wisconsin Rapids. I believe Rapids still does that today. But we took it a different approach now. New owners for the radio station, they stopped doing their kind of programming. So what we're doing now is actually sharing our programming that they can take pieces of it or use the whole thing. And generally, our council preview or our council update after council, which is a program we do in the studio, they actually put that on the air, and that's been nice. And they promo it for us, so we're getting another look that way by sharing out to the local radio station, which is very helpful in what we do. So I'm always working with really journalists around Marshfield area. I think it's really important to do that. And as what I did, I know it's nice to talk the same talk. It makes it much easier. So we're growing that area. I definitely see a value in it, and we'll continue moving towards that direction as we can. As a newscast similar to like Jeremy does, we're not that advanced. We only have myself and another person, and split between two things, because my main task is actually a director of communications for the city, which is generally writing and doing PR work. That is but I also have the oversee of the station. David is the photographer over here, is my behind the scenes of doing what we're doing in the TV world, and Hub City Presents. But actually, I believe some of those people with Hub City Presents have entered awards and have won them here in this. So that was really nice to see, and they've come here. They do take a value. But it's also nice to see that some of the newspapers, even the local TV stations are coming. We actually even do a segment with Channel 7, WSAW, with the mayor, and provide them so the mayor doesn't have to drive all the way up there. Their news reporter, or I should say anchor, morning anchor, comes down and uses our studio. We brand it for him just to help him out and helps the mayor. It doesn't look like it's coming, but we're just trying to be an advocate, a partner for them. So when we need something from them of getting a story for the city out, that is another part of my job, then we made those connections and we can collaborate, and they can get our footage or we can use their footage. We're building on that. So it just saves a trip for everybody, and I kind of like that. And you learn from each other by working with their anchor. That's something I never had training in TV like Dan in that area. So that was new for me in 2011, and still have a lot to learn. And hopefully someday we can bring a workshop in on how to be an anchor, because there's got to be tips and tricks to that using a teleprompter that I'm not sure about. So, but I think all of us are moving in that. And like I say, I saw that direction when I came to into community media. That's why it was a perfect fit back in 2011. And I saw this vision happening to all of us way back then. And now I'm seeing the progression with all our stations going that route. I tried it actually back in 2011 and succeeded in a lot of that, but again, small staffs, 2 people, you can only do what you can. But it's a value, journalism, a value, and I brought my former boss is going to be the keynote speaker today, Mark Trinan. So I thought that would be good, and we connected for many years and he hired me back a second time and as a journalist, and I thought it'd be great. So. That's really wanted just to talk about the connections that we've done and why they're so important, I think, to community media. And I think everybody else is seeing that connection. But there are some differences. But one last thing on us, a little bit different in Fact TV is we do have 3 channels. And we are still want to make sure that we are opening those channels up for local producers. So we did to made one of our channels, our public access channel, a totally producer's channel. And then we do have our other channel that was our educational channel called Marshfield Now. So that's our news area, and that's something that David Ballerstein handles. And we do a news segment. He does every maybe a week or every 2 weeks and goes out into the communities. So, and that's our station that's really for more higher end professional style. We run Rewind on there. We run Democracy Now. So it's not just all local, but we try to find some higher caliber programs. And Marshfield Now is the anchor of that. And we actually called the program Marshfield Now, or the channel, I should say. So we're trying to focus on our channel. Then we have our government channel. So yeah, local key, and working with newspapers will help a lot. So.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to be going into a discussion section for this seminar soon. But before we do, what I want to do is present another little clip. This is from Jasmine White. She is the Executive Director of Capital Community Media in Salem, Oregon. There was a webinar held on this topic in the Northwest region of the Alliance for Community Media. And she talks a little bit here, it's about a 4-minute clip. She talks a little bit here about how their station decided to go into community news and how they assessed the need for that. So,
You can hold that. Can you hold that mic?
Any comment?
What? So is it Talking Fitchburg with the G, or is
it in media, and see where we land. So this slide is really just to show you a visual of how much we rely on new technology and access to that information via that new technology. So all of the things you see listed on the screen are different pieces of technology or different applications that we needed in the past in order to listen to music or play games or having alarm clocks or GPS. Now all of that happens through our phone. And through research, we now know that people are consuming news and information that way too. So for us, it's really going to be important that when we design this community news program, that we can find ourselves in that space and are not just creating content for the channels, but creating news that exists and can be consumed on that platform, on this thing that all of us carry around all day. So a couple of years ago, CCTV went through a rebranding process in 2020, in the middle of 2020. And part of that process landed us to where we are today, which is Capital Community Media. And I think that this is the beginning of where we started to have the conversation about news. So there was some focus groups that happened, there was a survey that was conducted, and what we understand from that information is that news is the number one thing that people in this community are looking for and they want from this organization, which is different than what they wanted from the organization 10 or 15 years ago. So what you see here is our strategy for how we plan on moving forward and developing a news program. I think it makes a lot of sense to go slow to go fast, which means take the time you need within your organization to actually do a community needs assessment and to understand what value your organization can bring by creating that content. As a result of that, the organization rebranded because obviously we were more than television, so no longer being Capital Community TV, but becoming Capital Community Media, and trying to figure out how do we use these different platforms that we have accessible to us to share news and information content. So we have the channels, we now have a radio station, we have social media sites. So for us, we want to figure out how do you create stories one time or create a piece of media once and distribute it in all of these different formats to reach as many audiences as possible. So building strategic partnerships. I'm going to talk a little bit about our partnership with the Salem Reporter, which is a local newspaper here, which has been pretty successful for us, and I'm really excited about it, and I feel like it has the ability to grow and change as we grow and change as an organization. Allocating, and I put shift in quotation marks, resources, because for most of us, Budgeting is tight, so we don't necessarily have additional resources to allocate to create new positions and figure out a workflow for how to distribute this information. But we really have to look at our organizations internally to say, how do we shift the resources that we might have been using to do some other projects towards doing community news. And the last is leveraging distribution platforms. There's still a lot of power in our channels, and so it's important that we really understand how to leverage that. So here in Salem, we wanted to look at what is the,
Then she goes into the local press situation, and we're not interested. Here, hold that.
Hold that.
Hold that. Okay, so, all right, so this is the discussion section of the program. Oh, and I left my cell phone over there, so I have no idea what time it is. Yeah, I could. Okay, great. So, we're done at 11, so we have about half an hour or so to talk. What we did was we came up with a bunch of different questions that we thought would be interesting to talk about amongst everybody here and the people who are attending this workshop. So if you are attending this workshop, if you're listening to this workshop, it would be great if you would come forward and sit in the chairs right here so that you could participate in the discussion.
Come on, Paul.
Cole, Paul, come on down. All right. So while they're gathering themselves, so let's talk about assessment. Did you do any kind of assessment when you started your community news show? Is that something that was important to you? Did you do anything formal, or did you just sort of test, put your finger up and say, this is something we want to do?
Yes. No, I mean, I think we just started doing it. Right. We didn't really do it. Actually, when she mentioned that, I thought, well, that's a great idea, because, a lot of times, and I'm sure Bill does a radio show for us, and I'm sure a lot of times you don't know exactly who is seeing the content that you're creating. So it would be nice to do an assessment, I think, to see if there is a demand for news like we're doing it. Sounds like there is, just from other folks. And I do get a fair amount of feedback from people who do watch the program. And so that's a good thing. It's kind of like that, anecdotal contact with people, but we have not done an assessment.
I would think a benefit of doing an assessment maybe would be if we hear from people that want to see something, maybe we can reach out then and say, would you be interested in helping us produce such content or make your services available, or maybe pay for something, sponsor something.
We definitely assessed internally what kind of identified that our programming wasn't getting out fast enough. Like, that was our first assessment, was we can't keep operating the way we are. The second, I think, that we were evaluating is how could we help city departments get their information out, because we were right connected to them, to the hip. So why couldn't we do something to help them, get their information out when they're struggling on their end to find people and get it out. And I do think the feedback piece that you get from social media, that was an area that we were just getting involved in. We had a restart in 2010, kind of different scenario there at Fact TV, but we needed to set up a structure where we could get feedback. We didn't even have that. So the newscast allowed us to get shorter pieces out that connected to the community. That way we could hear back kind of what we're doing. And we are getting ready to do a needs assessment here for all city communications, evaluate every single product that we're doing. So I can give you the results after that.
We actually have 2 wireless mics floating around. Okay, is that one working well?
Test.
Yeah, oh, excellent. And then there should be one over here. Yeah, excellent. All right, so we don't have to run around with this. What about video on demand? Are you getting any feedback from those numbers? When you stream your news shows, are you seeing good numbers there? Because I know with cable, you never know. But I would think with streaming, you must be getting some idea, right?
I have the microphone in hand. Yeah, that really is a driving force of what we do because, the only feedback we'll get on TV is a lot through telephone calling. When's this going to be on, or why isn't this on? Well, that's not enough feedback. So yes, analytics are key, and one thing that we do is provide analytics to our communications committee. And we have to provide a full report of what is and what isn't, all the way down to even social media for the cities. So I think it's essential that analytics are your driving force. But we follow a strategic plan not only for the city's communication, but for the Marshfield broadcasting piece has a whole different strategic plan. Because they are different, they are quite a bit different in mission. So maybe that's something we can talk about at another time. But I think that's something that's changing with some of us as well in community media, because we're now facing to have more roles, less less of us to do all this. So, but like Jeremy says, I think that the city's at the hip, and that's really where you can target really good news. But analytics are key.
I just want to emphasize to our audience, anytime you have a question or you want to chime in, please just put your hand up and we'll bring a mic over to you. Yes.
I do radio show on Monday mornings, a couple hours. I do a real estate show on Wednesdays, and then I'm also doing sports broadcasts. The analytics I get, or the validation that I get, are from doing Facebook Live, YouTube Live, all of our social media. During the show, I can monitor how many people are watching, but what I'm really watching is after the fact and seeing how many people have gone back and visited the site. We were talking a little bit about that. But more importantly, it's the people in the community that come up to me at a restaurant, at Buck and Honey's or Beans and Cream we talk about, and they're either they're critiquing the show, they're complimenting the show, or going, oh my God, I can't believe you said that again on the air. But it's that personal touch, and even working with Jeff and bringing people to the station about ideas that they have, and being the faces, I guess, of the media center, being Dan, myself, any other producer, we have to be that mechanism to keep everything current and exciting, and the feedback back to the directors of it. But I really look for that feedback in the community. And I go out and ask a lot of questions. I have about 18 people that routinely watch or listen to the show on Mondays and Wednesdays, which I think is funny. And when the coaches get on me about critiquing a quarterback, I did my job.
Well, I think you're kind of introducing the topic of trust. Because here you are somebody people in the community know. They know who you are. They know when you're saying something, they know where that's coming from because they know you as a person. I think that is something that local media that, like we do, has all over national outlets because, we are part of the community. Does anybody want to speak to that, the trust factor of local news and how do you retain that trust? How do you make sure that whatever you're doing on your news show doesn't take advantage of something or become too inflammatory in some way?
Great timing for this question. On Monday, I took on the subject of transgender trans 101. What happened was the previous Monday, we were talking about the incident that happened in Sun Prairie with a trans individual coming into the girls' locker room. And I was talking about, well, I don't really know anyone that's transgender. My phone lit up. And also on Facebook, an individual, Sunshine Anderson, came on and said, well, I'm trans. Well, I had no idea. So I took on that role. During the show, my texts were just scrolling. I mean, every time I tried to ask her a question, it was going up. Before the show, what I did is I interviewed her separately, and I said, I'm really concerned about this, first because of your safety, and then I don't want to be disrespectful. I don't want to come across as the angry old white guy. I want to to educate. But I'm more concerned about you and your concerns. We decided not to talk about where she works or where they work, or what she does for a living or where she lives. But it was really a sensitive subject. Now, after the show and during the show, I've received phone calls complimenting me on the way I handled the situation. And to this day, it was the most difficult, for me, interview, and it took about 3 hours to prepare for it.
I can see the value of live because you're getting that immediate feedback and you're finding out what people are interested in or when you said something wrong, right?
I've done that a couple of times.
Yeah.
Trust with the media, this is just my own experience with the media over the years, and it's been 20 years since I've done it professionally. But people tend to trust their local reporters just like they trust Congress people or people who are their representatives to some extent. Now, if you burn that bridge more than one time, then you're going to have to re-earn that trust. And I think that's something journalists do every day. They're trying to be fair. They're trying to be, get multiple sides of stories out. And it's something that, honestly, you can lose very quickly, and then you have to earn it back. If you're a really good reporter or a really good journalist, it probably happens to you less than others. And I like the separation of a show like mine because I'm not working for the city. I like the fact that I am an independent journalist, so to speak. And I use that term somewhat loosely because, like I said, I'm a little rusty. And I saw when we were playing the clip over there before, I said something that I was like, I didn't even source that. So that bothers me. That kind of stuff bothers me. So I think you have to continually earn that trust from the people you work with. And if you're fair, they'll come back to you. And they'll continue to do stories with you.
Just to follow up on that, I think a nice thing about having people like Bill and Dan people see them around. They see them in restaurants. They see them shopping, and I think it's very simple to trust somebody who is sort of around. Just as visible in the neighborhood, and they know, hey, they live here, they work here, they shop here, whatever. And I think that it's nice to have people just internally in the city that. I think people, it's easy to trust them when they're just around.
Mary, just one quick note on that, and I think that's why working with the journalists out there, like I work with newspapers, radio stations. Those people, they still have larger staffs than I have, are well known in the community. They've established relationships, so that helps us build those relationships with what we're doing a lot quicker. And so I think that's why it's so key to work with those organizations, like even Wisconsin Eye now, because it gets you out into it. And I think even working with this Wisconsin Eye will help us in our public policy area a lot for what we're trying to do on TV with how we get our funding.
I was just going to comment that the partnership piece is so important for our staff. Regardless that I host the show, and I don't live in the community, so it's kind of tough for us to be there. But what I think we have going for us is all of our staff are forward facing. So as a team, I like to hear that a guy made that comment that, Fact TV's here or Fact TV's not here, because we all represent that entity and we become that forward. And that's not just me, that's everybody. And they're also out there making the connections. So they see Fact TV or you guys go out and cover these events. The more you do it, the more you're making those connections and actually building that relationship. And you become friends with a lot of these people that you get the opportunity to say who you are, what you're doing, and invite them to come in and see what's going on. We do that for the city staff and for our community, so that builds those relationships, and you can get that feedback instantly.
I'll let you talk in a second. I just want to clarify, too, that Sun Prairie and Fitchburg work a little differently. So Sun Prairie is a public access center, and so the show that Dan Presser does is a public access show. Dan is the producer of that show. Dan is responsible for that show. But Fact is operating more as a government access channel, and so the staff of that channel, those people are city employees, and so that's actually a city-produced show. So, so it's a different angle. So in this case, Jeremy is providing a program from the city, and so there's a different set of responsibilities there. John?
So I can help you fill the rest of the half hour, Mary, don't worry. I've got questions for everybody, but I guess I'll continue on that one because when you have the suggested talking points here or questions, you say, are there political pitfalls? How do we keep the trust of our viewers? Yes, it would seem to me that although I love the look and feel of Talking Fitchburg, I think any communication director at any city would love to be able to be pushing out their information that way. But aren't you walking towards those pits when you start working with local media as a government entity, when you start working with local businesses as a government entity? Won't there be a mayor or a city administrator or a city council at some point who says, they've crossed the line, your funding is gone, we're going back to just covering city council meetings?
So what kind of lines are you worried about?
That you would be, that people would accuse you of editorializing, that people would accuse you of favoring one local business over another, that people would accuse you of favoring one city council member or another.
So do any of you have rules in place for fairness, for making sure you are offering time to all businesses or all city council members or all departments, that kind of thing?
Well, let me chime in on that because I actually serve two roles. I'm actually split. I am the director of communications for the city, and I also oversee public access TV. We have a different name, Marshfield Broadcast. But when I do all the other stuff, we're sharing it to Marshfield Broadcasting from the city, although I am both. And that's very difficult, and that's something that we're working on towards probably changing in the future, is putting my position, not even really probably being more funded out of the general fund and sharing that information. I write all the press releases, do the public input, you name it, all that stuff. On top of the public access, it's been way too much. But I think that's where we go. We actually share it to Marshfield Broadcast so we can do that stuff under that name. So if we do a business feature, we sure wouldn't want to put that out as the city of Marshfield. We're putting it out as Marshfield Broadcasting, which is the city of Marshfield. It does say city of Marshfield, but I feel we have an area in there we're funded by franchise fees, so then that's where we can go. We go with that. So if we get something that somebody wants to promote, well, the city really doesn't want to do that because they're about city government and they don't want to be promoting and fairness like you're saying. So we don't share it on those platforms. We share it on our Marshfield Broadcasting platforms, and we let the public know that's what that's for. And it's actually been working out really well. But it is very confusing. We just had new alders saying, who are you? You work for the city? Are you contracted? Because when you walk into our office, what does it say? It says Marshfield Broadcast. It doesn't say anything about you're the director of communication, but you do both roles. That's confusing. So it's an issue. It's been an issue. I'd like to hear how Oshkosh does it in the future, because they have a communications coordinator, Andy. How does he handle that? But they have Jake that does that. They have another person that helps. So that's where I'm coming. We use the name Marshfield Broadcasting to help not cause those problems.
Right. And the other thing you have to worry about or be cautious about is if you are working with a business, you're not advertising that business. I mean, we are non-commercial. So there's a lot of ways you can feature a business without saying we are the best car dealership or we are, low prices or whatever, all those pitfalls that you can't do because that would become an advertisement. So so a lot of people work through the Chamber of Commerce, and through the Chamber of Commerce these shows are produced, and that way you're not directly working with a business. It's kind of the public access dance. But I think that one of the questions I want to ask the journalists in this room is, do you have some advice for our media centers who are getting into the news business? How do you keep it objective? How do you make sure you're not spilling over into commentary or opinion or not looking at the full picture? Do you have some? I'm going to give this to Dee.
Well, it's a very tough situation that you're in because you have funders who is the city. You also have the franchise fees. To some extent, you, I guess, have a couple of different funding sources. Yeah, I am a Fitchburger, by the way, and I appreciate the Fact TV. I'm not sure I have a good answer for that because I find the same dynamic at place in tribal news organizations. They are often run by the tribes. And so tribal government changes hands, just like city government changes hands. The flavor of what they're willing to report or not report changes with administrations. And then there's great pressure to either cover or sometimes not cover. That's the bigger pressure sometimes. Well, don't cover that zoning case because we have a split council and it's just a big fight. And so we don't want to get into that. So I don't know. I'd be very interested to hear how you guys navigate those issues because the council is not always going to be 7-0 or whatever. They are often going to be split. The mayor may have a split with the council. You know, how do you navigate those waters without getting into trouble with essentially your bosses?
No one wants to say. Oh, Dee, you just posed a question instead of an answer.
I don't have the answer.
How about the other journalist in the room?
For me, again, I don't work for the city. I don't, I do work and distribute my show through Sun Prairie Media Center. And so I look at it as that's a distribute. I'm kind of like a franchise, of the Sun Prairie Media Center. Do I do stories that the Sun Prairie Media Center covers? I do. So if they go to the city council and they have video, I will, like I said before, I'll grab clips out of that. And I try to do it as journalistically as possible. I try to get a couple of sound bites from differing sides. If there's not, I try to balance it out with what I know or who I've talked to with some balance. Is it always as balanced as I would like it? No. I mean, obviously we do a Bank of Sun Prairie. We just started doing this Bank of Sun Prairie tax tip kind of thing or financial tip. Bank of Sun Prairie is a major funder of the Sun Prairie Media Center, but we tried to keep it as journalistically, clean as possible. We don't advertise for them, but I when I worked at Channel 27 for the morning show, we did stuff like that all the time. And so you just have to try to. I mean, unfortunately, and I blame people like myself sometimes. That line between journalism and promotion has really been blurred over the last 20, 25 years. The golden age of broadcast news, it doesn't exist anymore. Do I wish it was? Do I wish it was still like that? Sure, but you need really, really good reporters to do that. And unfortunately, people stay in markets for a very short period of time. So I guess I'm preaching to the choir. It's hard to, I try to stay as separate as possible from the city's operations. I cover them. I will cover bad things that happen. I will cover crime. I will do that stuff. And they might not like it all the time, but they respect it.
Yeah, that's a really key point, Dan, is to keep that somewhat separation. And that's where we're having a bit, I don't want to say an issue, but we've had a few cases we would use a local journalist as a host. And this was done many years before myself. But now with my self in front of a camera all the time, and that really wasn't the case years ago in the station, more behind the camera, one of the alders did not want the news person on the radio or on the TV, or excuse me, the hub, I'll just say the newspaper, to be the host any longer. And that concerns me because that's what public access was about. But since we produced the show, there's a problem in there. When I say produce, as in behind running the cameras and doing all the editing. So we actually had to take that away on our post-council news conference they wanted me into the place, but that concerns that they maybe want me because I'm to be able to change the narrative a bit because of my job. I can't go out there and be the watchdog reporter that I would like to be because that's built into me. And that's also a hindrance for what my job is, because sometimes just because of my nature of who I am, people know who I am, media, the city still gets very concerned because I want to be there in a project like here. Because as not as a reporter, but as a communications person, because I need to know that information way before, so I can actually write a detailed news release. I just got an email to write or to do a chicken ordinance, and I would have liked to have known that 2 months ago, so I didn't have to have this thing done by today, and write it last night at midnight, and that's the reason why I think we got to look at how we're doing this, the sharing with public access, cities, and local media. It can be tricky, and we're trying to balance that line right now.
Yeah, I'm sitting here, and we do put a lot of faith in Dan, because Dan is a local, a community producer. But we sort of put a lot of faith in you that you will be objective, and just calling your show The News indicates that we hope it's going to be objective. But we have other shows that our alders have gotten pissed off about, and if you have two guys who sit there in their Trump hats and their Trump shirts, they're not trying to be objective. They're coming at it with a point of view, and I've had alders say to me, "Why are we funding this?" And I have to say, this is community media. These are folks from the community. They're doing what they want. We run a disclaimer before the show that says it doesn't reflect our opinions or elected officials' opinions or the city of Sun Prairie. And that's kind of who we are. Unfortunately, I've never had an alder challenge us on that.
I'm glad you're talking about a program for a second.
But yeah, we're talking about a program.
About council members.
Yeah. And then about the business aspect of things, where we are in Sun Prairie, actually, we're being encouraged by city government to raise more money from businesses and to seek out sponsorships and things like that. So, like it or not, I don't really like it, we are trying to be more pro-business and more promotional. So,
we did have a situation in Sun Prairie where we had a radio host running for office, and even though we had equal time rules set, and Jeff had taken care of that, the alder insisted that that host be removed from the air. Went to the administrator. The administrator came out and forced the director to create actually a rule, a guideline, saying that if you're a personality on air and you're running for office, you cannot be on the air.
A lot of access centers do have that rule. Like within a certain number of months or weeks of an election, if somebody's got a regular show, even if they're an incumbent official, they have to drop the show for, let's say, 2 months or 3 months before the election. It's a common rule. Does anyone else in the audience have any other questions or comments? Okay, John, anything else you want to be provocative about?
Not trying to be provocative. My next question is for John Schrader. I would also like to give thanks for the way that Wisconsin Eye has decided to share those programs with all of the Wisconsin community media on our program sharing mechanisms. For a long time, Wisconsin Eye decided that they didn't want to do that. And you certainly had rules in place from the beginning that said we don't want politicians to be able to use these clips in their own campaign materials. Is there anything you can share with us about that decision-making process that Wisconsin Eye went through to decide to share some programs with WCM?
Sure. I think I would break it into two parts. The first part was just kind of like time and technology. We're small staff. We've got a lot on our plates. If we're putting the effort into creating the content and all that goes into distributing it at Wisconsin Eye, do we have the bandwidth to easily get that content to other places? And then in talking to Jake, we determined that, we could solve that issue with technology by becoming a member and accessing the system that allows us to sort of upload content. So the technology side was kind of solved. And then on the kind of decision to the other side of the other part of it was just sharing the content beyond the walls of Wisconsin Eye. And I think what was an obstacle to some extent was like we're really trying to introduce people to the brand, the Wisconsin Eye brand. And at times since 2007, since Wisconsin Eye started, I think probably people would be surprised, maybe people would be surprised that when I'm out in the community, especially outside of Madison, people don't know who we are still. So it's like, well, let's keep it here and market it in a way so that when at least they're coming to Wisconsin Eye to kind of see it and be introduced that way. And we've definitely worked aggressively on the marketing side of things. But then in talking to Jake and others, it's like, well, why don't we turn that on end a little bit and say, well, here's an opportunity. There's all these great channels throughout the state. Why don't we fulfill a purpose at Wisconsin Eye is to get the work that we do out there as broadly as possible, but also use that way to alert viewers at other cable channels, other city channels and such, to see that work on that stream, on that cable channel, as a way to introduce them to Wisconsin Eye. So kind of like turning it on its side a little bit, coming at it from a different point of view, not so much thinking outside of the box, because now that I look at it, it's like, well, it made a lot of sense. But kind of getting outside of our traditional lanes allowed us to kind of make that switch. And then, I mean, certainly the collaboration with Jake and Mary on as far as the tech and seeing it that way. Does that get close to your?
Yes, thank you.
Is there funding decisions that are driving some of that?
There aren't any funding decisions driving the move for.
To push it out
To,
WCM?
well, I would say there are, and they come in the form of, if we can get the brand out there to more people and more people out there understand, well, this thing called Wisconsin Eye exists. What is it? Maybe I should go to the website and check it out. And then once you're there, there's opportunities to use the service, and then you're going to get a message at some point saying, please consider donating. In fact, I think one of the things that we did, what we do for the programs that we send out to the PEG channels is we do add at the very top a 5-6 second message saying, if you're interested in programming like this, please consider donating at Wisconsin Eye. So, yeah, that's part of the equation.
Wearing his journalist hat or his realtor hat with that question.
Well, one thing I'll mention at Wisconsin Watch, we are 100%, funded, or almost 100%, by both foundations and individuals who care about journalism, investigative journalism. One of our best selling points is that people see our stuff. And so that is an inherent advantage. Funders want to know that they're not just funding of this little website in Madison, Wisconsin. They want to know that, in fact, our stories are going out across the state, which they do. They're picked up by hundreds of news outlets. They get national attention at times. And so that's it's a mutually beneficial relationship that you guys have. You're getting your word out. They're getting great content. So we do that a lot, too.
I'll just chime in on that. That's one thing that I looked at for our producer station. It's not just producers that are considered really our producers. The channel is meant to share content from other organizations. So if our MACI, which is called our Marshfield Area Chamber of Commerce, wants to get one of their programs on, well, we only have 2 people that are staff. And that's just not going to happen to be able to be out. We'd be working 24/7, 7 days a week. But we want to make sure that we allow that station to be trained. We can train people with a camera, but we say it's your production. It's for you. Do you have volunteers that want to provide that program because really it's for you, and you can use it on your platforms just in cooperation with Marshfield Broadcasting is really what we're looking for. So I think even down to the local church programs now that we have 13, and access stations have always pretty much run those, they look at it as another avenue for them, rather than they're part of us. They're not really part of us. We're doing it on behalf of them. So we're a broadcasting station for them, similar to like AP in a way. But we also have those other segments that we're doing. We're spread pretty thin, but that's where I think is you're networking with them, but they're getting a value because they're not going to own a TV station. There's no way. And then a lot of times those staffs don't even have why purchase all this stuff when we already have it?
Right. Well, we're almost out of time, so I want to pose one last question. Assuming that part of our audience here today is going to be are going to be people who are interested in getting into community news, but they're a little scared of the whole thing, is there something reassuring you can say to them, or something that when you reflect on it, it makes you feel like, wow, I'm so glad we did it. I wish we had done it sooner. Anything like that would encourage people to get into community news.
Yeah, you make sure that you have your bed, where you work, the kitchen, and all that stuff, because it's a lot of work, and I'm sure Jeremy can say. It's not 8 to 5.
Okay, that's not quite what I had in
Sorry,
mind.
I had to say it, but
okay. Anybody?
It's time consuming and it takes a lot of time. I mean, doing good news coverage takes time. And that's something Jeff knows I'm frustrated with because I don't have all the time to do it sometimes. But it's no different than local TV is doing. They're cutting things. They're going through things. They're sifting and winnowing. They are not covering everything, but you got to cover the things that, and this is where the editorial control comes in. You got to cover things that you think are important to the community from looking at the agendas of city council meetings and school board meetings and what you hear in the local media. And I like your partnership with the local newspaper. I've tried to kind of foster that a little bit, but it's hard because they are so crushed for time as well. So I would encourage people to do it. Try to get a team of people to do it because it's hard when you do it all yourself.
I would just say that you're all doing it already. I mean, you're already out there covering the events. You're already in the community. You already have the inside track to do it. The staffing is the hardest part of it. And, I think what pushed this show or this format helped push us to with the mayor coming in tonight for the Friends of Access Award. He was the person who walked in who... John, you say you're presenting to your alders, you're working for your alders, and he was the first person to come in and say, boy, I like what you're doing. We're going to fund you. And it was a complete turnaround for us, but it started because we were already out there. We just took it and ran with it. And yeah, we can't go in deep. There's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of red tape there, but y'all are doing it, so you can definitely transition. And we still cover things in full. We never stop doing that. We have the airways to put full events out there, but when we can take a big version of an event, cut it down to a little thing and put it out there, you get a taste for it. Again, it's content filling. That's huge for us. So I think you can do it, at just start it and test the waters and hopefully you can get people to come in.
Just one last thing, Mary, on this. I think, journalists here like Deb, right? D, sorry. Localization. I think that's key. All of us have always localized a national story. And that's where I think, even if we get content and are sharing content that might be something from Madison, how does it pertain to the local residents where you're living? And you can use a lot of that footage, as long as they're okay with it, give them credit. But you can do your spin, and I think that saves a lot of time. We always did that in the newspapers to localize a story. I mean, back then you had 10 editors able to look and see and watch the AP feed coming in on, and then, hey, get a reporter out to localize that. So I think we're doing that now. Maybe you guys are, but again, it takes time.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much. So I just want to thank our speakers, Tom Laux with Marshfield Broadcasting at the City of Marshfield, Dee Hall with Wisconsin Watch, John Schrader with Wisconsin Eye, Dan Presser with Sun Prairie Media Center, Sun Prairie News, Jeff Robbins, Executive Director of Sun Prairie Media Center, and Jeremy Crosby with Fitchburg Fact and Talkin' Fitchburg. Anyway, thank you all for tuning in to this discussion.